Good morning and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. All week long we've been looking at the curious tale of Mephibosheth, a minor character in the story of King David who has not such a minor message for us. If you have watched every day this week, that sentence might not make much sense, as you have seen Mephibosheth have some good things happen to him, yes, including receiving some amazing grace from King David. However, we have also seen some pretty rotten things happen to Mephibosheth too, from being crippled at age 5 to losing half of the possessions that King David gave him. But back on Tuesday, when we talked about Mephibosheth getting crippled as a child, we spoke about how his disability never seemed to lead Mephibosheth to despair or depression, and that instead he seemed to live in simple trust of God, like we should. That's what we see so clearly when the story of Mephibosheth ends. I call it living what he received. Let me remind you of yesterday. The servant who was supposed to take care of Mephibosheth and his lands was treacherous and told King David that Mephibosheth had supported Absalom, who had led a revolt against the king. This servant, a man named Ziba, hoped to get the lands for himself. David, broken-hearted over the revolt and the death of his son, hardly paid attention and told them just to split the lands between the two of them. We talked yesterday of how bitter Mephibosheth had a right to be over this arrangement that would lead him to losing half of everything he had. Once again, Mephibosheth had a surprise in store. Let me put it to you the way Frederick Buechner puts it. Before David had a chance to leave from making his decision, Mephibosheth said that he was so overjoyed that David had driven the rascals out and come through the battle safe and sound that just to celebrate, he was prepared to let Ziba take the whole place. Now, whether or not he made good on that offer, or ever intended to, it hardly matters. It was a crazy, magnificent gesture to make. And maybe David was not too lost in his own grief to realize, however dimly, at whose knees he had learned to make it. If you remember, Mephibosheth was a descendant of King Saul, and the most common thing to do with descendants of previous kings was to have them killed so that they didn't mount a threat to the throne of the new king. But because of his love for Mephibosheth's father, Jonathan, King David had not only spared Mephibosheth, but had given him lands and servants and treated him like a son instead of an enemy. And having received that grace from David, now Mephibosheth is able to see beyond his own situation and offer grace himself. He lived what he received. And maybe that's what's so amazing about grace. And that's where Mephibosheth's story draws to a conclusion, but not to a close. You see, this whole saga seems to turn the question to us. You have received incredible, overwhelming, amazing grace from God, which you don't deserve and for which we are very grateful. Now, how do you live that out in your lives? Having received grace, to whom do you give it? Having received unlimited grace, how can we orient ourselves to give it unlimitedly? Having received unconditional love, how can we inculcate and embody love so that, like Mephibosheth, we give it away? It's a small story in the bigger story of King David, but the story of Mephibosheth brings us, in the end, to a greater awareness of God's grace for us and the invitation to express God's love and grace through us. Funny how a crippled man shows us how to walk the walk. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.